The city didn't sleep, it watched. From penthouse windows and black-tinted limos, the world of money glittered under the moon like polished steel. Somewhere beneath it all stood a man who didn't belong, yet was bound by duty to protect it. The night air cut sharp as glass when the car door opened and she stepped out. Perfect, untouchable, eyes full of frost. He followed, silent, presence heavy like shadow. She wouldn't meet his gaze. He didn't expect her to. The distance between them wasn't measured in steps, but in centuries of unspoken history. His heartbeat was steady, her pride louder than traffic. In a world that priced safety higher than love, he was the shield she despised needing. And still, he asked himself, how do you protect someone who refuses to see you as human? The morning began like any other, but beneath its stillness hid tension sharp enough to cut glass. The mansion awoke in quiet luxury, servants moving like whispers, sunlight spilling across marble floors. He stood near the doorway, always at a respectful distance, eyes calm, presence constant. She sat at the breakfast table, surrounded by untouched plates and the soft hum of wealth. Between them lingered an invisible wall built from judgment and silence. Every time their eyes almost met, pride interfered. Her words were polite but laced with coldness, his replies measured and brief. It wasn't hatred that filled the room. It was misunderstanding, heavy as lead, and yet behind her glances of dismissal, something flickered. Curiosity, faint and unwilling. Rain fell without warning, drumming softly against the car roof as the city blurred by. The sound filled the silence that neither dared to break. She sat with arms folded, chin tilted high, watching droplets race down tinted glass. He drove with unwavering focus, the rain reflected in his eyes. Outside, life moved on. Pedestrians running for shelter, horns echoing through the storm. Inside, two people shared a silence louder than thunder. She wanted to ask why he was always so calm, why nothing seemed to shake him. He wanted to tell her that calm was the only thing keeping him human in a world that judged his skin before his soul. But silence was safer, and both had learned that truth, once spoken, could never be taken back. The evening gala glittered with arrogance. Gold chandeliers, velvet gowns, and laughter, polished to perfection, filled the room like perfume. She entered first, poised and flawless, every movement rehearsed for the eyes that followed her. He lingered at the edge, invisible in plain sight, watching every shadow that moved too close. When a photographer raised a camera, her smile returned effortlessly. The perfect daughter of power. But behind her calm mask, something unsettled her. Maybe it was the way he stood. Silent, unmoved, his presence like a steady heartbeat in chaos. She hated how aware she was of him, how safe she felt. In the same breath she resented it. The music swelled, and for one brief second, their eyes met across the crowd. Time paused. Then it moved again. Night fell heavy after the gala, and the world outside returned to silence. The car rolled through the sleeping city, its headlights carving tunnels of gold through the dark. She leaned against the window, makeup smudged, eyes lost in thought. He drove in silence, the faint rhythm of the tires the only sound. The earlier glances replayed in both minds, though neither spoke. The distance between them had shifted, still wide, but no longer unreachable. She whispered a tired thank you, soft and uncertain. And for the first time, he allowed himself to look at her. Really look. The lights reflected across her face like ghosts of something almost tender. For a brief moment, the air between them changed. Then the road curved, and reality returned. The morning after the gala felt heavier than the night before. The tabloids screamed headlines of luxury and deceit. But inside her father's mansion, the air was colder than the marble floors. He waited by the doorway, professional as ever, while she argued quietly with her father over breakfast, about security, about freedom, about him. Words like boundaries and image filled the room, but none of them spoke about fear. When she stormed out, she didn't see his expression soften, just slightly, before he followed at a respectful distance. In the hallway's silence, her heels clicked like defiance, and though she'd never admit it, she felt safer knowing he was behind her. He followed her through the glass corridors of her life, from studios to boutiques, from flashes of paparazzi to moments of unseen loneliness. She didn't speak much, but the air between them had changed. Sometimes she caught herself glancing back, almost saying something, then swallowing it down. When rain began again, she paused under an awning and looked at him. For the first time, she noticed the tiredness behind his stillness, the kind that comes from years of proving worth. He held her umbrella without a word, and in that small act, something shifted. Not loudly, but like the first crack in a wall that had stood too long. They sat across from each other in the back of the car again. Silence stretching longer this time, but softer, almost companionable. She finally asked him why he never smiled. He replied simply that not every job allowed it. The answer stayed with her, gnawing gently. She looked out the window at passing faces, people who didn't have guards or glass walls. Somewhere deep inside, envy stirred. He caught her reflection in the glass, saw the faint trace of sadness there, the kind that money couldn't hide. Neither said another word, but both felt something unfamiliar, understanding. Evening came quietly. She walked alone along the balcony, the city below a constellation of gold. He kept his distance, as always, hands clasped behind his back, eyes following without intruding. She asked him if he ever missed normal life, the kind without danger or pretense. He smiled faintly, the first real one she'd seen. Normal never lasted long for me, he said. She nodded, gaze drifting to the horizon where clouds glowed orange. For once, the silence wasn't heavy. It was peace. Strange, brief, almost sacred. Later that night, she overheard him on a call, voice low, calm, professional, but tinged with something heavier. He was reporting a threat. Her name was mentioned. Suddenly, the illusion of safety cracked. She froze outside the door, listening to words she wasn't supposed to hear. They might move soon, he said. It'll keep her close. Fear crawled under her skin for the first time, real and cold. When he hung up and turned, their eyes met through the doorway. Neither spoke, but the truth was clear. Danger was closer than she'd ever imagined, and the man she once dismissed might be the only thing standing between her and it. Morning broke under a sky heavy with clouds, pressing down on the city like a warning. She walked briskly through the lobby, sunglasses hiding eyes that hadn't slept. He followed at a steady distance, every step a rhythm of duty. The tension between them had grown thick, tangled between unspoken truths and quiet fear. When she turned sharply and told him to give her space, his calm nearly cracked. But he obeyed. People in the lobby glanced at them, unaware of the storm brewing under polite silence. She thought freedom meant walking away. He knew better. Freedom without protection was an illusion she couldn't afford. The elevator doors closed between them like a final word, but both knew it wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something about to break. The argument came like a spark finding dry wood. It started with small words, orders, refusals, pride, and ended with silence sharp enough to draw blood. She accused him of controlling her life, of shadowing her every move like she was a prisoner. He replied only once, "That's my job." But his tone carried something deeper, pain, disguised as duty. Her anger burned hotter, and in the heat of it, she said the words she would regret. Words about skin, about difference, about not wanting him near her. The look on his face stopped time. He didn't shout. He didn't defend. He just stood there, eyes steady, and walked away. The slam of the door echoed like a verdict. Hours passed, but her words wouldn't leave her. They echoed through every quiet hallway, every reflection she caught of herself. For the first time, shame crept in, slow, burning, merciless. She realized she hadn't been angry at him. She'd been angry at fear, at losing control of a life that had always been managed for her. Meanwhile, he sat alone in the car outside, rain pelting the windshield, staring at nothing. Silence filled every inch of him. He'd learned long ago not to take words to heart, but this one had cut deeper. Not because of what she said, but because he had begun to care. And that made everything dangerous. When she found him later, standing by the car again, her voice was smaller than usual. She tried to apologize, but words stumbled out, clumsy and unfinished. He nodded once, professional, eyes distant. She wished he'd yell anything but that quiet. The silence between them had changed again, no longer just cold, but wounded. The night sky loomed dark, the air thick with thunder waiting to break. She realized then how easily she could lose him, not to danger, but to her own arrogance. And somewhere deep inside, a question whispered, "What happens when the person you look down on is the only one who ever looked out for you?" The night cracked open in chaos. Screams, glass shattering, a flash of movement near the entrance. He reacted before thought. Muscle. Instinct. Duty. She froze as a man in black burst into the hallway, gun raised. The next second stretched into eternity. He moved. Fast. Decisive. Pushing her aside just as the shot rang out. Pain exploded across the silence that followed. She fell to the floor, his body collapsing beside her. The world shrank to the sound of her own heartbeat and the sight of blood staining the marble. The bullet had his name. No, it had hers. He took it anyway. The world blurred into sirens and flashing light. She didn't remember screaming, only the sound of her own heart hammering in her chest. Everything moved too fast. Strangers shouting, hands pulling her away, voices calling for help. Somewhere behind the chaos he lay still, eyes closed, his calmness replaced by unbearable silence. The city outside continued as if nothing had changed, but inside her everything had. The air smelled of fear and regret. She tried to reach for him, but someone held her back. For the first time in her life, she didn't care about appearances, or pride, or rules. Only that he might never open his eyes again. Hospitals have their own kind of silence. Heavy, humming, endless. She sat there, hours blending into days, the scent of antiseptic thick in the air. He lay surrounded by machines that breathed for him, their rhythms steady and cruelly indifferent. The man who had always stood between her and danger now rested beneath soft white sheets, fragile yet unyielding. She spoke quietly, though he couldn't hear her. Words she never thought she'd say. Apologies, gratitude, fear, love, whispered like a secret she wasn't ready to admit to herself. Outside the window, dawn broke softly over the city that had almost taken him. She wondered if forgiveness could too. He woke days later, the world slow to return. Light burned at first, then shapes, then her, sitting there, head bowed, hands still around his. When she looked up, something broke inside her. He didn't speak right away. He didn't need to. His eyes said what words couldn't, that he was alive, that it wasn't her fault, that he'd do it again. She laughed and cried at once, the sound trembling through the quiet room. For the first time, she saw him not as her protector, but as the man who had risked everything without asking for anything in return. And that realization felt heavier than the silence that once divided them. Days turned into quiet recovery. The world outside whispered about scandals, protection failures, even love stories, but inside that room, none of it mattered. They talked about simple things: books, food, places they wanted to see. The air no longer carried tension, only calm. She smiled more now. Softer. Real. He spoke less. But when he did, his words carried weight. Not orders, not warnings, just truth. Somewhere between those quiet hours and shared laughter, she realized she no longer feared the world. She only feared losing him again. No. When he was cleared to leave, she walked him to the car. The world outside waited, flashing cameras, questions, rumors. But for a moment, they stood still, wrapped in silence that said more than words ever could. He thanked her, not for her care, but for finally seeing him. She wanted to say something back, something that could match the weight of what he'd done, but words failed. He smiled, small, knowing, and opened the door. For the first time, she didn't look at him as her bodyguard. She looked at him as the person who changed everything she thought she knew about strength, about grace, about love. He returned to work sooner than anyone expected. The mansion looked the same, but nothing inside it felt familiar. She walked beside him now instead of ahead, the rhythm of their steps oddly aligned. People whispered when they passed, rumors stitched from pieces of truth and lies. Yet neither of them explained anything. Sometimes silence spoke louder than defense. She'd learned that protection wasn't control, and he'd learned that forgiveness could be its own kind of courage. Between them now was no longer duty or defiance, but understanding, quiet, steady, unspoken. The world's noise returned. Flashing cameras, talk shows, online speculation. She faced it all with calm she didn't know she had. Every question thrown at her was about him, about appearances, about choices that didn't belong to anyone but her. For once, she answered honestly, she owed her life to someone the world never saw as equal, but she did now. The air in the room thickened when she spoke those words, but she didn't flinch. Somewhere across the city, he watched the broadcast in silence, eyes steady, pride hidden behind stillness. He had never wanted thanks, but hearing it, he allowed himself to exhale. Days later, she visited him, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. The visit wasn't grand or rehearsed. She brought coffee and quiet conversation. They spoke about ordinary things, how loud the city was, how strange peace could feel. For the first time, laughter replaced tension. It wasn't joy exactly, more like relief, the kind that comes when two people finally understand that what connects them can't be explained or undone. When she stood to leave, he said softly, "Take care." She smiled. "You too." For both, it was enough. Weeks passed. Rumors faded. Life resumed its usual rhythm, but something fundamental had changed. She began volunteering quietly at the same community center where he once trained recruits, away from cameras, away from noise. When he arrived one morning, surprised to see her there, she simply smiled and handed him a clipboard. "Need help?" she asked. He chuckled, shaking his head, though the answer was yes. For once, they stood on the same ground, not as protector and protected, but as two people rebuilding a world that had once divided them. One evening, as the city lights blinked alive, she stood by the same balcony where everything began. The wind carried the sounds of life, horns, laughter, distant music. He joined her quietly, as he always did. They said nothing. They didn't have to. Between them was a peace born from fire, something neither money nor power could buy. For the first time, she didn't see him as a part of her story. He was his own, strong, whole, unbroken. And somehow that truth made her feel freer than she'd ever been. The noise of the city returned, but softer now, like a storm that had decided to rest. The headlines faded, the whispers thinned, and what remained was space to breathe. He walked through streets that once ignored him, nodding at faces that finally met his eyes. She moved through the same world differently, seeing stories in every stranger she once passed by. The lesson had taken root. Not every battle is fought with fists or fire. Some are won quietly, by standing tall, by forgiving, by beginning again. The world hadn't changed overnight, but perhaps they had. When the cameras returned, it wasn't to chase scandal, but to record change. She spoke carefully, no longer out of fear, but out of purpose. Her words weren't about guilt. They were about gratitude and responsibility. Somewhere backstage, he listened, arms folded, not as her guard, but as her witness. The crowd didn't cheer or jeer. They simply listened. For the first time, truth didn't need to shout. It just needed to stand. He spent the next weeks visiting schools, community halls, the small places the news never reached. He spoke about patience, about finding strength without bitterness. Children listened the way only truth makes them listen. He told them bravery wasn't loud. It was steady. When he finished, there was silence first, then small hands clapping, honest and bright. Outside, the sky stretched wide, and for the first time in years, he felt entirely free. She had learned that gratitude wasn't a speech. It was action. Quietly, she started a foundation to train new protectors, open to anyone with discipline and heart. When he arrived at the opening, there were no photographers, just a few workers and a ribbon fluttering in the wind. Their handshake was simple. Work to be done, bridges to be built. The city looked the same, yet something invisible had shifted. Respect had become mutual, and the past finally had somewhere to rest. At dusk, they met again on the balcony. The same view, the same wind, but a different piece. The city lights shimmered like quiet applause. They didn't speak about the past. It no longer needed words. Somewhere below, traffic moved. Lives continued. And above it all, stillness. What began in misunderstanding ended in grace. Some stories don't close with noise or triumph. They end the way healing does. Softly, honestly, with light breaking over everything that survived. Rain fell again, but this time it didn't sound like sorrow. It sounded like closure. She stood before the press conference steps, drenched, trembling, yet unafraid. The cameras blinked like 1,000 judgmental eyes, waiting for her to crumble or retreat. But she didn't. She had run from truth before, hid behind her father's power, behind her own name. Not today. Somewhere in the distance, he walked away for good, or so he thought. Her voice cracked the air like thunder when she said his name. The noise stopped. Her heart knew where to go before her body did. And in that moment, running through the rain toward the man who had once taken a bullet for her, she realized love wasn't rebellion. It was redemption. The moment stretched like forever. He turned slowly, disbelief flickering behind calm eyes as she ran toward him. The world around them blurred. Traffic honking, cameras flashing, people shouting. None of it mattered. When she reached him, breathless, soaked, her hands found his face as if proving he was real. No words came at first. None were needed. She had once refused to even look at him. Now, she couldn't look away. His expression softened, a small, almost pained smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "You," she murmured. She laughed through tears. "Neither should you." And in the downpour, where judgment once stood tall, they simply stood, human, unhidden, and seen. By the time the rain eased, silence fell heavy over the crowd. She turned toward the cameras, her hand still in his, and said what no one expected. That she was done living behind lies, that the man beside her had saved her life not once but twice. First from danger, then from herself. Gasps rippled through the crowd, but she didn't stop. Her voice trembled, but her eyes never left his. "If loving him makes me wrong," she said softly, "then I don't want to be right." The words hit the air like truth breaking glass. And for the first time, he didn't step back. He stepped closer. The world could whisper, but the rain had already washed away their fear. News traveled fast, faster than truth, faster than reason. Headlines screamed, opinions clashed, but none of it mattered anymore. They had already chosen peace in a world addicted to noise. Days later, she stood beside him in a small Brooklyn park. No guards, no cameras. Just quiet wind and the sound of children playing nearby. The city felt smaller, kinder. He looked at her and said, "You didn't have to prove anything." She smiled softly. "I didn't. I just had to stop pretending." Their laughter broke the silence that once defined them. No crowd, no chaos, Just two souls finally free to exist without permission. The city moved on, as cities do. But for them, time slowed. Not in grand gestures, but in quiet mornings, shared smiles, and the comfort of knowing that love had survived what hatred could not. She visited the place where he once fell, the marble now spotless, the past forgiven. He joined her, standing close but not touching, just enough to feel presence. "Funny," she whispered. "This was where it ended," he replied. "No, this was where it began." They stood there in silence as sunlight filtered through the clouds, turning every shard of glass into gold. Some stories end with a kiss. Theirs ended with peace, the kind born from pain, forgiveness, and the courage to see each other truly.